results you measure. So what happens if you measure the wrong thing? Hi, I'm Stephen Levy, and I wrote the book Legal Project Management. Control costs, meet schedules, reduce risks, and maintain sanity. Well, let me start by telling the story of the Soviet-era screw factory. Every economist knows this story. In the Soviet Union, they used to measure productivity based on the amount of raw materials that you consumed. Well, this screw factory would get their allocation at the beginning of each month, zinc, steel, whatever else goes into screws, and they would spend the first day of each month making these honking enormous screws that nobody particularly wanted, but at the end of a day, they had used up their allocation, they had met their metrics, they had been a success according to the system, and then they had 29 days to drink vodka and play cards. Now, obviously building giant screws is not a very good measure of productivity. Now, in the legal world, we've got the same kind of problem. This is called an input metric versus an output metric. An input metric is what you use up. In the screw factory, of course, it was zinc and steel. In the legal world, it's hours. Hours is an input metric. You measure hours, you get hours, but the client doesn't really want hours. The client wants value, the client wants results. But those are sort of hard to measure, and so we measure hours, and that's called a substitute metric. Substitute metrics are metrics that you use when you're not sure how to measure what you really want. The problem with substitute metrics is that they don't measure exactly what you want, and often over time they diverge significantly from measuring what you want. For example, law firms are encouraged to measure client satisfaction these days. Now that's good. Dissatisfied clients are clearly not going to reuse your services, but the real metric is what's called repurchase intent. How likely is this client to reuse my services? Well, you can have a client that's very satisfied, but is even more satisfied with another firm, or is very satisfied but hasn't told you that they just don't have as much money to spend next year, or is satisfied but somebody in the hierarchy is upset with something and has decided to consolidate all their work down to 2 law firms, and you're not one of them. You have great client satisfaction, but you haven't measured what you really need to measure, which is repurchase intent. That is a substitute metric. Bad measurement is using input versus output metrics and using substitute metrics. You get the results you measure, and if you measure a substitute, that's what you will get. Now, I'm not saying there's a canard, you can't manage what you can't measure. That's not true. There are many things that you can't measure well that you can manage. But if you measure the wrong thing, you will definitely be on the path to something other than success, just like the Soviet-era screw factory. I'm Stephen Levy, and thank you very much for listening.